The same will be the case with the other form of the this, with here. Here is, for example, the tree. If I turn around, this truth has vanished and is converted into its opposite. No tree is here, but a house instead. Here itself does not vanish. On the contrary, it abides constant in the vanishing of the house, the tree, etc., and is indifferently house or tree. Again, therefore, the this shows itself to be mediated simplicity or a universality. In section 98, Hegel is stressing to us that the very same dialectic that we went through in sense certainty with respect to the time or the temporality of the object, thinking about a this in terms of the now, and then realizing that the now can be noon or night or 3 o'clock or 11 to 11, whatever it is that we want. There's a dialectic involved in that shows us that things are much more complicated than we originally assume as we're experiencing them, as we're saying this is what is most real, this is what we know. Now when we turn to spatiality, it gets even more complicated in some respects, because with time you just have, now, and then, it's going to be in the future, and that'll be a different now, and the time stream, as we think about it, is a whole bunch of nows. It can get more complicated than that if you have other theories of time, but we're going to try to avoid that. But think about spatiality. It's not a continuum just like this way and this way. Already it's different than time in that I can move one way along the spectrum and another way along the spectrum, whereas with time, I'm constantly being launched into the future. The past is constantly receding behind me. I can bring it back in memory, but it's not the same thing. With spatiality, I can move forward, I can move back, I can go up, I can go down. We have 3 spatial dimensions. So we should think of space less as a continuum and more as something like a manifold. And what does that introduce for us? That introduces a lot more possibilities for what it is that the this, understood now in terms of spatiality, is here can be. So we see that same sort of dialectic playing itself out. We pick something that is substantive, that we can identify. We look at the tree. And as a matter of fact, I'm looking out the window at a tree right now. So we see the tree. And here now becomes that thing impinging upon us. Is that what the here really is? Is that what the truth of sense certainty is? No, because we can shift our perspective. We can turn away from the tree and now look at the house. Or maybe we only had to turn this far. Here it could be I look at the door, I look out the window, I look at the camera, I look at the chalkboard. All of these are possibilities for that here. So we go through the same sort of progression, except notice in this case, we can even go from there to whatever else you like. Because look up, there's a light blazing in my eyes. Now I'm a little bit dazzled. These are all very different experiences. So none of them is really what the here is. He says all of these are converted into their opposite. If we look at the house is not the tree. It's also not the etc. If we look at the tree is not the house. It's also not this. And whatever this happens to be, whatever extra stuff we want to cram in there, that's not what these things are. So there's a lot of negation going on. He says, what's going on in this? Are we losing the here? No, here itself does not vanish. As we've seen with now, the here is what remains constant in all of this. The here is something that we can pick out with language. The here is also something that we're able to think. It is a universal, as Hegel says. It's mediated simplicity or universality. In this case, the this of the here. So he says, it abides constant in the vanishing of the house, the tree. As we move from one object to another, one experience of something external to us as being the here, or even something that could be internal, like here's a hand. Use, G. Moore and Wittgenstein's famous example, right? Anytime that we're doing that, we're dealing with something that is what it is and also is not what it is, because it is being provided to us in sense certainty and because of the mediating function of the here. Pure being remains, therefore, as the essence of this sense certainty, since sense certainty has demonstrated in its own self that the truth of its object is the universal. But this pure being is not an immediacy, but something to which negation and mediation are essential. Consequently, it is not what we mean by being, but is being defined as an abstraction, or as a pure universal. And our meaning, for which the true content of sense certainty is not the universal, is all that is left over in the face of this empty or indifferent now and here. In section 99, we're right at the cusp of a really important transition in sense certainty. And we're sort of bringing things to a close, or at least to a knot, as far as Hegel is concerned in this passage. So where are we beginning, or where are we starting from in this passage, from what's been happening in the others? The essence of sense certainty has been revealed as pure being. Now, why pure being? What we had thought we were getting in sense certainty was beings that were manifesting themselves to us as being, as what is. And so in any given experience of that, we have more than one thing going on when we originally thought we only had one thing. So we think about the this, and then this already starts to split into here and now. Or it could be, if we wanted to, there and then as well. We could pick whatever sort of deictics that we want, or indicator words. And already we've got a splitting, a Spaltung going on. But it gets more complex than that, because as we've seen with the here can be a multiplicity of different possibilities. It can be a tree, it can be a house, it can be the etc., the, and so weiter that, we have. Or the now can be noon, it can be night, it can be whatever we want. So that means that these are universals. And universals we've seen have an interesting kind of, not quality, but status, as we'll talk about in just a moment. So what we've arrived at is the essence of sense certainty. What's really going on in sense certainty is that we're encountering pure being. But we're not encountering pure being in the sense of having some sort of intuitive grasp of the whole as such, or even with a particular object. I don't grasp the pure being of this chalk as just this piece of chalk, or my hand is just my hand. What is going on then? Well, the truth of the object, the truth of what it is that we're experiencing, is realized to be the universal. And the universal, like he says, has several important qualities that I've got sort of, summed up here. It's something that can be said, so I should have put up there the word language. It's something that exists linguistically. It can also be thought, because we human beings have the capacity to think beyond just particulars and to form universals. What else? Can't be sensed. So strangely enough, while we do have to experience the here as this spot here or that spot over there, we can't actually see the here. The here only exists in the multiplicity of its particulars. It is and it isn't its particulars. It's not any one of its particulars, but it is all of them at the same time. It is what makes them the kind of particulars that they are. So we've got this interplay going on here that we're going to see happening over and over again throughout the phenomenology. From certainty, we start being concerned with truth, and the truth helps us to illuminate what certainty really is. These are not exactly the same thing, but they exist in a complex mediated relationship. So now when we think about what that means, that we're grasping pure being, we're not experiencing pure being as such in the sensual, sensory type of way, but we are grasping pure being. And as Hegel says, and it's worth going back to the actual text here, he says, we're not grasping it in immediacy, because pure being is not an immediacy. It's rather something, in which we find negation and mediation occurring, and not just occurring as kind of a byproduct, but as something essential to the way that pure being is. Now, this is a somewhat different conception of being than would have been proposed by metaphysicians in the past, like, say, Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas. And it's not quite yet, the being that's going to be proposed by other later metaphysicians as well. But this is a quite interesting notion here, isn't it? That pure being as such, that we encounter as the essence of sense certainty, involves negation and mediation at its essence. Now, he goes on and he says, when we're talking about being, or pure being, it's not what we actually mean when we say being. It's not what we intend. Meinen is the German term. He's going to play on words with that a little bit in a few passages down the line. But the meinen is, to go back to some of the other passages before that, that's what we were intending in relating ourselves to the object and in trying to speak it through language. We were intending it and we were also uttering it. We were either sagen or aussagen the object. We were trying to express it, is another way to say. And so being is, in effect, not what we can actually intend or mean when we say it. Instead, it's being as an abstraction. So this is going to require some unpacking. He says it's being defined as an abstraction. The word there could be understood as corresponding to an abstraction as well, for which the true content of sense certainty is not the universal, is all that is left over in the face of this empty or indifferent now and here. What it is that we're intending and we're trying to express, and unsuccessfully doing so, in part because of the very dialectic built into sense certainty, is some kind of surplus that is more than just this empty, abstract form of the now or the here or the this. So we want to ask ourselves at this point, well, what is going on? What have we not attended to yet? Where else can we go with this dialectic? When we compare the relation in which knowing and the object first came on the scene with the relation in which they now stand in this result, we find that it is reversed. The object, which was supposed to be the essential element in sense certainty, is now the unessential element. For the universal which the object has come to be is no longer what the object was supposed essentially to be for sense certainty. On the contrary, the certainty is now to be found in the opposite element, that is, in knowing, which previously was the unessential element. Its truth is in the object as my object, or in its being mine. It is because I know it. Sense certainty, then, though indeed expelled from the object, is not yet thereby overcome, but only driven back into the I. We have now to see what experience shows us about its reality in the I. Now in section 100, we find that a very important reversal or shift of perspective is being charted out. And what's going on is a move from here to here. And this is what Hegel has said has actually occurred at this point. We started out in sense certainty with a sort of priority of the object over the knowing subject, in a sort of naive way, thinking that whatever it is that we're apprehending impinges upon us and imposes itself upon us, upon our consciousness, and we just sort of take it in. And the more passive, the more receptive we are, the truer and the richer that kind of knowledge will be. And as time goes on, we realize that that's not really the case. So we begin with the object over the subject, you can say. The object as what is essential versus what is inessential. It doesn't matter who the I is. As a matter of fact, if you get rid of the I as much as possible, the hope is, well, now you'll have this experience and you'll really be able to see things how they are. But what we find is that instead things are more complex. And what turns out to be inessential is first the object, which gives way to the universal. the now, the this, the here, whatever it is that we want to do, what we can name in language. But then there's another reprioritization that's taking place. The subject, the knowing, the thinking, the acting subject, the experiencer, is the one who's actually running the show. That's what's been going on all this time. So the way things were here actually has to be flipped back upside down, with the object now being a bit more complex and the subject as being what is truly essential. And what does that mean for us? Well, like Hegel says, it's shown us that there actually isn't any certainty or truth in the object per se of sense certainty. That's where we actually thought we were going to get certainty. And when we explored what the meaning of its truth was, we found out that the truth turned out to be somewhere else, namely in the universal, and that undoes the certainty of the object for us. And we tried to be certain about the universal, but the universal isn't even something that we can grip onto and say, aha, now we've got it. This is the entire sum of what's going on in this process. The certainty of sense certainty, and here is the mystery of it that's now being unveiled, lies in the activity of the I, the knowing or the thinking or the experiencing subject. So that's a major shift. What this means is that the object has truth, or has its truth, the truth that is appropriate to that object, only as my object. Here Hegel is actually going to have a sort of play on words going on. He's using this German term meinen, which we've discussed already. And meinen means intending, what we're gesturing at, what it is that we have in mind. We've already seen the contrast between intending and expressing, aussagen. But it also has an affinity with the word that's used as a possessive pronoun. Mein, meinen. Mine is the cognate in English, that which belongs to me. So by my intending something in what I am experiencing in sense certainty, I am making it mine. I am making it have the truth that I give to it. It doesn't simply have a truth in and of itself that it imposes upon me, towards which I have to be completely passive. Rather, I am actively engaged in this very process. To be able to see it under the guise of a universal, within the luminosity or intelligibility that a universal provides, I'm the one who's doing that. The I. And so sense certainty is not, as he says, overcome or aufgehoben. That when we see any use of this word aufgehoben, Aufhebung, or things like that, we ought to be thinking about whether a transition has happened going to the next stage or not, the next gestalt. And he's saying, no, it hasn't. There's still more going on here. Sense certainty has not been aufgehoben, but rather it has been pushed back. I should have left that there. I thought it was just some scratches. How ironic, huh? For what I'm doing here. It's been pushed back, zurückgedrängt. It's, repressed, you might even say, into the I. The meaning of sense certainty now resides in the I, in the subject who is having the sense experience. So rather than the objects out there being what sense experience is truly about, it's rather what I am bringing to it, what I am contributing to it, what activity of mine it constitutes. So what does this mean for us then? Well, he tells us at the very end of this. It says, we now have to see what experience shows us about its reality in the I. What's reality? The reality of sense certainty, of experiencing things. What is the reality of experience within this I that now has assumed the kind of, shape or form of yet another universal, yet another abstraction? Because who is this I that we're talking about? That's a key, important topic that we're going to explore. The force of its truth thus lies now in the I, in the immediacy of my seeing, hearing, and so on. The vanishing of the single now and here that we mean is prevented by the fact that I hold them fast. Now is day because I see it. Here is a tree for the same reason. But in this relationship, sense certainty expresses the same dialectic acting upon itself as in the previous one. This this I, see the tree and assert that here is a tree. But another I sees the house and maintains that here is not a tree but a house instead. Now, both truths have the same authentication, that is, the immediacy of seeing and the certainty and assurance that both have about their knowing. But the one truth vanishes in the other. I've remarked before that it doesn't take Hegel too long to start introducing new dialectical movements within, whatever it is that we've now achieved some sort of what appears to be sort of fixed static point. And that's the same thing that's going to happen now with the I in this section 101. So we've established now that the I is central, is essential to what's going on in sense certainty. And what we have now is a new immediacy. So whenever you see immediacy, by now you should, have a sort of red flags going up. If Hegel says that there's something that presents itself as immediate, it's not going to stay immediate very long, because immediacy is never what truly is the case in the Hegelian system. But we've got this I who's now engaging in acts of sense perception, in seeing, in hearing, in other senses. And we don't have to worry too much about, how exactly the sensorium works or anything like that, inner senses versus external senses. We're not worried about that so far. What we're interested in is the fact that what this has achieved for us is it's attained a kind of status of providing a resolution to one of the problems. We've been concerned before about, when it came to the here and the now, the this of sense certainty, what keeps those what they are? What preserves their meaning? And we had them as universals, and that's fine, but what about their determinate content? Well, as it's going to turn out, what it is that does that is the I. The I preserves or holds fast or determines the content. If where I look, where I keep on looking, that determines the here. The now, okay, time not quite so much. You have to do a little bit of stretching with this, but we can focus in on how we understand time. And Hegel says that this is actually an advance. So I determine the here as, say, a tree, right? I keep it a tree so long as I've got my eyeballs looking at it. So long as I determine what it is that my senses are taking in. Could be that, I do that with my tongue too. I go up and lick the tree or something like that. The bitterness of the bark. Or I'm scratching the tree and I'm listening to the sound of the bark and it's, impinging on my fingers and I'm smelling the odor of freshly peeled birch or something like that. We can go into all sorts of details. But the point is, the I is actually what is keeping this what it is. He says, I hold them fast. Now is day. Why? Because I see it. Because I'm there. It's day for me. Remember, we just had this thing about the meinen, the intending, which is also mine. So he says, I see the tree, and I assert that here is a tree. Now we end up in a problem, though. And we're going to introduce another wrinkle to the dialectic. And here, Hegel is in many respects prefiguring what is going to be going on in a much more famous passage that we'll get to, or much more famous section that we'll get to later on down the line, with self-consciousness, which involves consciousness of an other. Because you got to ask yourself, well, who's this I? Is it me? Is it you? Is it some sort of ghostly, spiritual I over and above us that we both somehow partake in, a la, the form of Platonic man or human being or something like that? No, the I is an actual person, but then there's another I. Actually, a whole world of other I's, right? And that other I, he says, doesn't see things the same way. Well, I'm holding fast that, sense certainty, and here is the tree. That other I is saying, no, it's the house. Which of us is right? Well, we're both right, because we're both perceiving it. But then what's the truth of sense certainty? What is really going on in it? He says, well, he's perceiving that, you're perceiving that, you just have your own separate perceptions. Hegel's saying, no. The capacity for us to hold this fast opens up a vulnerability of our very own selves to others who can likewise hold it fast at the same time. He says, both truths have the same authentication, the immediacy of seeing, and the certainty assurance that both have about their knowing. But the one truth vanishes into the other. And we see this happening when somebody says, no, you're wrong. What we're actually looking at is not a tree. It's a painting. And the one certainty begins to ebb and disappear. The truth begins to be lost in that of the other. We can do the same thing, by the way, with day and night. All we need to do is do something that wasn't available for Hegel at the time and communicate across time zones, right? If I'm communicating with somebody on the other side of the world and it happens to be day for me right now, maybe it's midnight over there. So the same thing can be done for temporal as well as spatial. And now what we see is we have to be concerned about the relationship between these two I's, which both seem to be the I of sense certainty.